Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today we're reviewing Brockhampton's All-American Trash Mixtape. So today, instead of me bringing you guys a brand new album review, as in like for a new album or something like that, I decided to, go back and do a review of an older project, not a super old project by any means, but Brockhampton's, like I mentioned before, All-American Trash Mixtape, which was released in March of 2016. So like I said, not a long time ago by any means, but, just considering what Brockhampton have done since then, it seems like a while ago almost. Now, of course, I'm kind of, getting hyped up for Saturation 3's release of the band's, or not the band's, the group, I guess is the more appropriate term. The boy band, I guess. The boy band's third album being released sometime, hopefully this month in December. I didn't really have any ideas for videos this week, so I decided why not just review this, as to get hyped for Saturation 3. And plus, it's the only Brockhampton project that I haven't reviewed so far, as in like them as a collective, Brockhampton. If you want to see the reviews I did for their other two albums that have already, been released, the playlist is going to be linked in the description down below with all my Brockhampton stuff in it, as well as at the end of the video. It should be up here on the screen. You can click on that and it will take you to that playlist. So let's talk about All American Trash here. Really the first full-length project that we got from Brockhampton. Now, before the release of this mixtape, the group had put out a couple of singles in 2015, as well as some of the individual members having put out material at times, whether it be Kevin Abstract with the album he had put out before that, or some of the members just had singles here and there and things of that sort. But this was really the first project they put out together as a collective. And listening to this thing through for the first time after I got into Brockhampton with the first Saturation album around that album's release. I didn't come around to this project until a little bit later. And listening through this project, I could definitely notice some differences here compared to the Saturation era of the group. Some of the aspects of the Saturation era that I do really like are kind of not quite as developed here on this mixtape, or just aren't at present quite as much. For example, one thing I really liked about some of the Saturation albums was that lots of songs would feature many members of the group kind of doing their own thing. You get to see all their different all the aspects that make each of them individually great, and when they put them together into one product, you get an even greater result when you combine all these things together. Here on All American Trash, on the other hand, lots of these tracks really don't feature a lot of the members together on one track. Like occasionally you'll have maybe two members on a track doing vocals, or maybe even one. There's some solo tracks kind of thrown in here as well. Not really any tracks where you have most of the vocalists in the band doing something on one track, which is kind of a bit of a different thing. Yeah, one thing I do kind of like about this change is that we get to see some of the individual talent of some of these members shine through a bit more. That is, if you're not super familiar with some of their individual stuff that they've put out before, which I know some people aren't, just because it's not under the Brockhampton name, technically. So they may not be super familiar with it. When the people hear something like this, however, you might be exposed to some of these individual members in, just kind of a more individual climate, where you get to see them kind of show off their own things on their own, tracks, really. And this thing really does have sort of a mixtape feel to it, in the regard that it's not quite as cohesive, I feel, as some of the Saturation albums. But at the same time, as far as mixtapes go, it's not, the most thrown together randomly mixtape I've ever heard. But still, there are moments where I feel like transitions from track to track maybe aren't quite the best, or, like they could have maybe done something a bit better when it comes, just to the placement of the tracks here in the track listing, just because some of these tracks do feel rather different from each other. Like, for example, you'll have more, laid-back R&B type tracks immediately followed up by just more, harder-going hip-hop songs, which, they are good songs all the way through. I don't think this mixtape really has a bad track on it, but, just the placement, I think, maybe could be improved here or there. But then again, this is a mixtape, so, I don't exactly expect it to have, a really cohesive flow overall, I would say. The mixtape also features a couple of tracks that I wouldn't really consider songs, more of like skits, for example. The opening track, Encino, which is really just, two of the group members kind of just having this little skit that introduces all the members of Brockhampton. It's not really a song, I would say, But it's kind of a nice introduction to Brockhampton, I guess. If you were listening to this for the first time, they list off all the group members and things like that. It's kind of interesting, but of course when you're listening to this mixtape a lot, kind of like I was, going into this, it can kind of start to wear on you after multiple times. But it is a pretty funny skit. It's very enjoyable, and I do kind of like the purpose it serves in the greater context of this mixtape. And then you also have this sort of skit, not song thing, Cliff later on in the track listing. And the reason why I'm not, 100% sure if it's a skit or really what to classify it as is because it features some samples of some other songs by members of Brockhampton. You hear Kevin Abstract's Leader, which was kind of a leftover track of his that he released later on. Matt Champion's, I believe it was Mansions on there. You hear Ben Carson, which is a track on this mixtape that was played earlier, on here again. Kind of like, it sounds almost like they're, playing around with the radio or something, switching between stations, and you have these songs coming on or something like that. And then you have this kind of skit part provided by this person. I don't know who the person is. I don't know who she is. But, she does sound kind of familiar, and I think it's because it might be the same person who does kind of this spoken word skit at the beginning of the Bareface song, No, I believe it's No One Like You, the song that he's a member of Brockhampton. If you're not super familiar with the group members of Brockhampton, one of the singles he put out, and, there's kind of a spoken word part at the beginning of that track. It sounds like the same person. I'm not sure, who this person is, or, maybe it's, a sample from a movie or something that I just don't know, and that's why it's the same thing. I don't know exactly, but it's kind of an interesting little intermission on the album. It's not really boring. It's kind of interesting. It's not quite as interesting as the actual songs that you get here, but it is kind of a creative transition between some of the tracks that we have here. As for the actual songs here on this project, like I said, I enjoy a lot of them. I like a lot of the diversity that we have here, and I like how we get to see some of the individual group members show off their talents, as kind of like a first look into this group. And I do like how we get to see some more unlikely, pairings, at least kind of compared to the saturation era of this group. So there's some odder pairings of, people in this group together. The opening, song, not really the first track, the second track, that is Ben Carson, which I mentioned before, was really just kind of an Amir band, and with Merlin as well on that track. It's just kind of them two together really on this one song. And it's a pretty good song. I really like the beat on this thing, how it kind of comes in at the beginning. It kind of starts off a bit more quiet, transitioning from the first, skit, and then it just kind of growls to life, and it's really, it's just very, very powerful, I guess, is the way to put it. It's a very enjoyable song, and I really think it's a good, opening, not really technically an opening track, because it has a skit at the beginning, but, the first real song that we get here, I think it does a good job of, being that. Another one of the more hip-hop oriented songs here, the track listing, Flipmore, which is more of a Merlin track. He kind of talks about dropping out of college, something that he would go into a lot more detail on in the Saturation albums. And, once again, it's a very interesting kind of concept there. I like the beat on this track as well. It kind of has this sort of, just kind of crazy feel to it, I guess you could say, which goes very well with Merlin's delivery on the track as well. I think it's a pretty solid track, a very enjoyable one. And, kind of to juxtapose against those more hip-hop oriented tracks, you have a lot more of the more laid-back, softer R&B, alternative type tracks that I do find myself enjoying a fair amount. Like the track Michigan, which is, kind of a Kevin Abstract solo track. And the interesting thing about it is that it doesn't really sound like a track that would fit onto either of his solo albums, the one he put out before this mixtape and the one that was going to come out a couple months after. It doesn't really sound like it would fit onto either of those projects. It still sounds like a Kevin Abstract song, but it sounds, distinctly like something that was made for a project like All American Trash, which, I'm certain it was, but I just think it's, very interesting how he managed to give this track, its own sort of sound to it. You also have the track Palace, which I think is, probably one of my favorite songs, if not my favorite song on this mixtape. It features vocals from Bareface, Joba, and Matt Champion, which is kind of an unlikely combination. I don't think we've seen that combination on the Saturation, albums. That's why I really like hearing it here on this track. I also like, another thing about this mixtape that I like, just kind of to go off on a little bit of a tangent, Matt Champion's vocals. On the Saturation albums, he's mostly rapping for the most part, and he is a good rapper. I do like his rapping, but, some of the tracks here on this mixtape where he's doing a lot more singing, as well as some of the solo stuff that he's put out as well, that I've heard where he does do a lot more singing. I do enjoy. I think he has got a good voice, and maybe on Saturation too, I like to hear him singing a bit more, but I don't know what we're gonna get. Back to Palace though, I really enjoy this track. The guitar that just kind of rolls in the background has a very nice sound to it. It's just very relaxing, yet at the same time a very dynamic and very interesting song. The really short track on this thing, Contacts, is performed by Rodney Tenner, who is no longer a member of Brockhampton. Really, he appeared on some of the tracks on this mixtape, as well as some of the singles they put out in 2015, like Hero and Dirt, for example. You might be familiar with him from those songs as well. And, Contact shows him doing a bit more singing. It's really this very short, very acoustic, but also, very beautiful track, and I really enjoy it. And, hearing him on this song, as well as some of the other tracks on this mixtape, like Infatuation, makes me wonder what Brockhampton would have sounded like in the Saturation era if he had still been a member of this group. He's not the only former member of Brockhampton that appears on this project. However, there's also the former producer Albert Gordon, who is no longer part of Brockhampton as well, who did production here on this mixtape as well. He does the guitar parts, I know, in Palace, which I talked about before, as well as in Poison, as well as some of the other tracks, I believe. And while he's no longer part of Brockhampton, I do enjoy his kind of guitar sound that he provides here on some of these tracks. I think it's very enjoyable, and it gives some of the tracks here on this mixtape a very distinct personality of their own. The end of this project shows a lot of the, introspection and more sad sound that Brockhampton is kind of known for at times in their music, especially with tracks like Home, which is, primarily done by Bareface with some matte vocals in there as well. Just another very beautiful track. His vocals are, excellent here. Just the more laid-back kind of feel that this track has, it's almost a bit nostalgic sounding, at least to me, but it's a very enjoyable track as well. You have Cotton Hollow, another one of the tracks here at the end, which is a more hip-hop oriented song, but unlike some of the ones I mentioned before that are a bit more hard-hitting, this is a more introspective, just sort of sad song. And I think it's a pretty great one, honestly. It's one that didn't really stick with me all that much on my initial listens of this mixtape, but in recent time it's grown on me to be one of my favorite tracks on this mixtape. You also have tracks like Poison, which I mentioned before. I like the guitar parts on this thing. The vocals here sound nice. It's just overall a really solid song, in my opinion. And then the closing track, Lost in Love, which is just, once again, a more, sadder, just kind of introspective track. Has a bit more of a relaxing feel to it as well. It's a pretty good closer to this mixtape. Overall, I have to say that this mixtape, despite the fact that I don't feel like Brockhampton are, completely to the full degree of potential quite yet, I still think that they show a lot of potential here on this mixtape that was eventually going to be fulfilled when they released the Saturation albums, or at least the two that we've already gotten so far. The mixtape really shows off a lot of the talents of the individual members of Brockhampton and occasionally puts them together to show some very unique outputs. However, I don't really feel like it was going to be until the Saturation albums when they really started throwing lots of members together on tracks that, their full potential would really be reached. And in that regard, this mixtape definitely feels a bit less, to the full potential that they would have later on, especially coming back to this thing after hearing the Saturation, which is what I heard initially from this group. It seems a bit different. However, I do really appreciate how you get to see some of these members doing their own kind of thing. You get to see some of their own unique little quirks that, of course, you do get in the Saturation albums as well. But here, I feel like it's really easy to kind of, pick up on them just because there are less members on, each track typically here on this project. You get to hear some unique combinations, like I said before, like on the track Palace that I mentioned. The production on this thing all kind of has a very diverse sound, but at the same time, despite being very diverse, once again, kind of like the rest of Brockhampton's music, it all kind of maintains a similar feel to it. It has sort of a similar kind of sad, at times, introspective feel that could at times get to be angry or kind of crazy, like on Flipmore, for example. It's overall a mixtape that, once again, isn't quite as cohesive as the Saturation albums, but it's a mixtape, so I don't really expect, a ton of cohesion. And, considering some mixtapes I've heard, I would say that this is one of the more cohesive mixtapes I've definitely heard in my lifetime. It's a very solid project, in my opinion, and despite the fact that I just still don't like it quite as much as the Saturation albums, once again, that's kind of a very, I hold those albums on a really high regard. This is still a really good mixtape in my opinion, definitely a great starting point for this band when it comes to full-length projects. Had I heard this thing back in 2016 when it first dropped, without, having heard the Saturation albums, I definitely would have been interested in this group, definitely would have been paying attention to them more, and, I kind of wish I had heard it back in 2016 because it is a really great project, and it does offer a lot of great songs on it. So if you're a Brockhampton fan, and for whatever reason you've only heard the Saturation albums and you haven't quite gotten around to checking out this mixtape yet, make sure you check out this mixtape because there are a lot of tracks on here that you're probably going to like, a lot of cuts that you're going to enjoy if you like the stuff that you've heard so far. If you're unfamiliar with Brockhampton, at all, this isn't a bad place to start necessarily because, like I said, you get introduced to a lot of the members of the group and their own little personalities here on this mixtape, and it might be a bit easier to get into it than on the Saturation albums because, like I said, on those albums they throw lots of people on one track, which is great. It's something I really enjoy, but it could be a bit much for some new fans, when you hear 7 vocalists across an album, kind of to pinpoint who is who. I know that's how I felt when I first got into Brockhampton. Maybe hearing this project will help you with that a bit more, even though they technically have 8 vocalists here on this mixtape as opposed to their current 7, so, pick your poison, I guess. No pun intended, because there's a song named Poison on this mixtape. But yeah, pretty much, if you haven't done so, check this mixtape out, because you're really going to enjoy it, I'm guessing. Yeah, if you enjoyed this review, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future album reviews, including my review of Saturation 3 whenever that drops. If they drop any singles from that project, I might be reviewing those here as well, but I heard that they may not be doing that with this one, so, I guess it's whatever ends up happening. I'll just work according to that. Like I said, in the description down below, you can follow me on all my social medias, or check out the link to my Brockhampton playlist where I have my reviews for the first 2 Saturation albums, as well as some of the track reviews I did leading up to Saturation 2, and the demo track they released to follow. And just an apology for my review on that. I mentioned that it's the lead single from Saturation 3. That's apparently not true. I didn't know that at the time when recording it, but, it doesn't really affect my thoughts on the track. I still think it's a pretty good song overall. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoy Brockhampton, make sure you subscribe and like, and stay golden.